A confirmation regarding the audio, please, guys. If you're able to hear me out perfectly well, kindly confirm the same. Thank you very much. We shall be starting in a couple of moments. So, hello, good evening to all of you, and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep. Welcome to this webinar where we shall be talking about few of the topics important for your mains examination, which are associated with the aspect of environment ecology as well as science and technology. And along with that, also we shall be picking up a topic which appeared in the portion of Kurukshetra for the December edition. So, one by one, we shall be holding the discussion for these topics. And while having the discussion, we shall also be talking about that how to approach these topics and whether it is that a topic can be utilizable for your prelims as well as mains examination, what kind of questions can you expect from that, and the basic understanding of the topic is something that we shall be focusing upon. Now, before I initiate the discussion, an announcement regarding the PTS, the Prelims Test Series. All of you, you have to be very clear in your mind that for the mains-based topics discussion that we are holding, first of all, you are required to clear the prelims examination, and there is no better way than to practice through the test series. So I would encourage almost all of you that please do appear for these tests, try to extract the maximum out of it, and accordingly you will see your progress automatically and you can monitor it and track it as well. So you have a host of different tests that you can basically appear for and measure your progress. Now, having said that, today the topics that we are going to discuss are broadly 6 different topics. So most of them obviously from GS paper 3. Now here the topics that we are going to discuss. First of all, the report which has been generated, that is the State of Finance for Nature Report 2022. Then the ozone hole recovery, that has been happening at a tremendous pace. So we shall be trying to analyze what is this ozone hole recovery, why is it making such a news, and we shall be also talking about the associated international protocols and agreements in place which have basically helped us recover the portion of ozone. Then we shall be talking about the cryomesh technology, whereby we are able to, and now the scientists are able to freeze the corals which have been endangered significantly, which have gone through several phases of bleaching. So we shall make ourselves aware, first of all, that what do we mean by coral bleaching, and also what this cryomesh technology can help us achieve. Then we shall be talking about pharmaceutical pollution, how it impacts the biodiversity and our day-to-day lives, before talking about the nuclear fusion breakthrough, which was achieved in December, which holds a very bright future as far as it comes to reliable energy, clean source of energy, and as well as an energy source which can prevail and persist for a very longer duration. And then eventually, we shall be tackling a detailed analysis and an analytical topic, that is bridging the digital divide. Meanwhile, I shall try to take as many questions as I can in between, but our well-qualified subject matter experts will be at your disposal. So please feel free to ask any questions, obviously related to the topic and related to the webinar itself. Please feel free to ask any questions that you have, and they will try their level best to answer almost immediately. And few of the questions I shall be taking at the end of the session. That is, after we have discussed all these 6 topics, then few of the questions from different areas is something that we shall be talking about. Okay? Now, here, let us initiate without further ado the discussion for the first topic, that is State of Finance for Nature Report 2022. Now, first of all, you have to understand why this is important. That is very, very relevant. Why is this important? So, State of Finance for Nature, The name in itself, even without analyzing what it means, what is contained in the report, what are the details of the report, even before that, prima facie, if you look at this, what does it tell you? It tells you, or it gives you an idea that it must have something to do with the aspect that how we are able to provide financing for nature in order to, and why do we provide financing for nature? So that we can conserve it, so that we can preserve it, so that we can basically combat the menace with regards to the destruction of biodiversity, conservation of biodiversity. We can fight climate change. So that is something that this report deals with. Now here, why this report becomes important is because of the basic fact that throughout the past few years, if you take a look at the various international meetings, conventions, protocols which have come into the place, be it the Paris Agreement, before that the Kyoto Protocol, everything, it talks about devising a kind of a financial system which can take care of the natural services, and at the same time it can be beneficial for the humans as well. So this report gives you an idea, first of all, that how is it that we are tackling the destruction of nature, how much finances are available for the destruction, to combat the destruction of nature that is happening in front of our very own eyes. Now, when we talk about this particular topic, it is relevant both for your prelims, as well as mains examination. Now, which portion is it that is relevant for the prelims? In the case of the prelims, you can be asked about the report, in the sense that who generates the report, right? That can form a kind of an easy multiple choice question. Then you can have questions with regards to findings of the report, right? And in the mains portion, you can have questions with regards to the broader perspective that we are going to talk about, that is nature-based solutions. What are they? Right? What? Then also the aspect of how they can combat climate change. Okay. So this is the portion which is relevant for your examination. Now, once we are aware of that, let us start to understand what this topic is about. So basically, State of Finance for Nature. This report for the first time was generated in 2021. So this is the second edition of the report. This again sometimes is asked in the prelims examination in the perspective that you will find a statement mentioned that this is the fifth report which has been generated, and you as a candidate have to be alert enough to find out that it is wrong. It is only the second report. Now then, who generates the report? So this report is brought out by UNEP, that is United Nations Environment Program, which was basically established way back in 1972, along with the Economics of Land Degradation initiative launched by the government of Germany. Then the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, that is UNCCD, and the EU. So these are the four major partners which bring out this report. One is your UNEP. Then you have the government of Germany's initiative to combat land degradation, then United Nations Convention to combat desertification, and then you have European Union. Now, what does this report talk about? And what is it that we have to focus upon when we come across this report? So here you have to understand that this report talks in significant detail about nature-based solutions. Now, what do we mean by that? When you think about nature-based solutions, that automatically gives you an idea that this is a solution for what? in order to conserve the loss of biodiversity, in order to basically combat climate change. So for these aspects, you do need some natural solutions. There can be artificial solutions such as geoengineering, etc. But natural solutions provide longevity. Natural solutions provide a better protection of biodiversity as well. So what is it? So nature-based solutions are actions to protect, sustainably manage, or restore natural ecosystems that address societal challenges such as climate change, human health, food security, water security, and disaster risk reduction effectively. So these are natural solutions in order to combat climate change, disaster, etc. For example, now, when we talk about tackling coastal floods, in the coastal areas, whenever you have occurrence of, let's say, a cyclone, or you have occurrence of, let's say, a tsunami like event, eventually the coastal areas, they get inundated, they get flooded, and that leads to loss of life and property in the tunes of billions. Now, how do we prevent that? We can prevent that by going for afforestation. So for example, if we go for afforestation, right? Afforestation in the coastal area. So what will it do? So the trees that you will plant, let's say this is the coastal area, and here you have planted a host of trees. So what these trees will end up doing is, they will end up forming a kind of a natural barrier. Now, this is a nature-based solution where you have not built up any kind of artificial structure. You have gone for a natural restoration of the ecosystem, and that in itself is protecting that region from the menace of the floods. Now, why to go far away? Take the case of the recent incidents or the recent happenings which we have been seeing in the region of Joshimath. Right? All of you would be aware of the Joshimath crisis that the country is facing as of now. Even if, let's say, you are not following current affairs, still, I'm not ready to believe that nobody would have heard about that, what is happening in Joshimath. But still, for those uninitiated in this, when we talk about Joshimath, in Joshimath, what is happening is that the land is sinking. The land is subsiding. Right? So there are large cracks which are opening up across the entirety of the slope. Many houses are getting destroyed. Now, is there a way in which we could have prevented this from happening? Or is there a way going ahead into the future that we can prevent this? Absolutely yes. If, let's suppose, across the slopes, right now, what is happening? This slope that you have, this slope in itself is sinking. So this slope is taking a shape somewhat like this, where things have started sinking here. Right? The land is simply sinking. Now, there are various reasons attributed to it, so I won't go into the detail of it. You will cover it in your webinar as well when you talk about disaster management. So there are various aspects because the slope is unstable in that region. It is a seismic zone, experiences earthquakes. It is a zone which experiences very high frequency of cloudburst events as well. There are a lot of unsustainable construction activities are happening. All these have weakened the slope, making the slope very prone to these slides. Having said that, could we have prevented it? Absolutely yes. And can we prevent it going ahead in future? Absolutely yes. How? By planting trees. So if we go for, let's say, across the slope areas in any kind of sloping region or any kind of a mountainous terrain, if you go for afforestation programs across the slope, not only will it increase the green cover, which is very vital for, remember, green cover and greenery is not only important for biodiversity, it is important for us and our health as well. The air that we inhale, that pollution, the greenhouse gases, they are absorbed very, very readily by the trees. So the more number of trees that you have, the better it is for human health. So that is the economic benefit that you can accrue from it. But at the same time, if across any particular slope, Let's say you would have planted very dense vegetation, or even or if not very dense vegetation, but natural growth of trees would have been allowed there rather than construction of hotels and other unsustainable methods of construction practices that we are following. Now, these trees, what they would have done is they would have bound the roots and the soil in its place. So thereby you can prevent events such as sliding, mudslide, earth slide, landslide, all these kinds of sliding actions which happen, you could have very well prevented it. So this is a natural solution, nature-based solution. At the same time, it will be beneficial in the economic sense as well, right? The so much amount of money that you spend on, let's say, protecting a kind of an animal or a kind of a faunal species that you find in the mountains, you won't have to spend that much amount of money. At the same time, it will purify the air as well. It will be better for the Himalayan ecosystem as well. So with one kind of methodology or one method of operation, you can achieve multiple goals at one go. So that is what is nature-based solution. Now here, I will give you a clue that when we talk about nature-based solution, that always helps us build a kind of a resilience to the various different damages that are normally and naturally caused by various different hazards. So for example, and this is where I'm telling you, this is the portion which can be relevant for your mains examination. This is something which can be asked in your mains examination, that what are nature-based solutions? How can they help us? Now, I'll give you the example. Suppose when we talk about various different types of hazards, such as if we talk about loss of life and assets due to intense wildfires which happen. Now, in that case, what can be the solution? Forest management can take place, though you have to refrain from planting those kinds of trees which secrete natural oil or a kind of a generic oil that they secrete from the leaves, from the stems, which can further enable that fire, further increase that fire. So we can go for forest-based management where you have a definite gap after some distance so that the fire does not continue to rage on. So this is again a nature-based solution. For example, landslide, soil loss, and siltation due to intense rainfall. Again, I will take you to Joshimath. In Joshimath recently, we received close to around 19 centimeter of rainfall. 19 centimeter of rainfall. Areas of Rajasthan receive around 15 centimeter of rainfall spread throughout the year. So if you receive that much amount of rainfall and if you don't have vegetation to absorb it, to help it penetrate deeper into the soil, into the underground aquifer, what will happen? All the soil will simply drain off. So protect and restore forest to stabilize soil and slow the water runoff, right? Rather than doing this, what are we doing? We are going for construction. Because wherever we see there is an economic opportunity, we waste no particular time. You will find that small, very small, minute hotels, they start being constructed immediately, right? Similarly, contamination due to flooding, reduced river flow, crop failures, etc. All of this can be tackled with various different types of nature-based solution. Now, that is the important aspect of it. Heat stress due to the urban heat island. There also, if you expand the open spaces, green spaces, that will also be beneficial in order to protect that community, to protect the local environment. So these are basically the benefits of the nature-based solution, which can be financially beneficial as well. And obviously, naturally, it will be very conducive, very beneficial. So when we are talking about nature-based solution, is it only to prevent landslides, to prevent flooding action, or does it also help us to fight climate change? Because as of now, climate change is the biggest disaster unfolding before us, and it is unfolding before us very, very slowly. One at a time, an area will get extraordinarily flooded. One at a time, there will be cloud burst. One at a time, there will be coastal flooding. All these are what? Heat waves. What are these? These are manifestations and results of climate change, which is happening in front of us. It is no longer a myth. It is a reality. So can nature-based solutions help us to combat climate change? Absolutely yes. Basically, when we talk about, let's say, climate change and the global effort to combat climate change, Paris Agreement immediately comes to the fore. Now, Paris Agreement is a part of what? It is the part of a convention, right? Which convention? United Nations Convention to, or rather, for climate change, right? Very good, Deepak, Bittu and Sarabjit, and Priyanshi also. Very good. So as a part of this United Nations Convention for Climate Change, earlier you had the Kyoto Protocol, which was put in, which was signed way back in 1997. And that was, again, in order to mitigate the effect of climate change. And then Paris Agreement, that basically was signed in 2015, came into force in 2019, and that again sets a kind of an ambitious goal that we have to restrict the global warming by around 1.5 degrees Celsius as compared to the pre-industrial era. So here, if you carry out nature-based solutions, which is also sometimes referred to as NBS, if we are able to carry out these nature-based solutions and implement it, you will find that this in itself can provide 37% of the things that you are required to do by the year 2030 to achieve the targets. Now imagine, for this, you don't need to invest significantly. You need to plant local varieties of plants and trees in various areas. You need to strengthen the ecological services in various different biodiversical regions. And that in itself can take you towards the path of solution. For example, restoring native forest at the margins of the river to avoid landslides, and that forest can also act as a carbon sink. What is a carbon sink, by the way? Carbon sink is that activity whereby the carbon dioxide, etc., is absorbed by the trees from the atmosphere. So in a way, carbon sinks, they reduce the concentration, the overall presence of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, which lead to global warming. So this will always help to combat climate change. At the same time, if let's say there is a river which is moving, if you have barren areas around it, no trees, no plantation, you know what will happen? When the river flows with its might, all significant amount of might, when the river flows, what will happen? The river will start eroding its banks, something that you observe in the case of rivers such as Koshi, such as Brahmaputra, such as Ghagra. In these Himalayan rivers, you will find that coast or the stream bank, the river banks, they are being eroded. So that basically destroys the nature. That basically can lead to flooding in other areas as well. So in order to protect that, in order to ensure that there's a flow maintained in the river as well, and the river does not dry up immediately, we can go for afforestation programs across the river banks. So this can be a kind of a solution. Now, what are the findings of the report that we are talking about? So this report talks about the fact that presently, the public and private financial flows to nature-based solutions. Before you get confused, let me write here, NBS stands for nature-based solutions. Right. So private as well as public financial flows means as initiated by the government. Private financial flows indicate what? As initiated by various different organizations, various different companies, etc., as a part of their endeavor as well as their responsibility to protect nature, they also fund these activities. So that funding is estimated to be close to around 154 billion US dollars, and that in fact is majorly contributed by the governments of the world. So 83% contribution is by public funds and only around 17% is by private funds. However, if you compare it to the previous year, this has not seen a marked increase. The first report indicated that you had a kind of a funding of almost around 150 billion US dollars. That was present in 2021. So overall, this year, to be very precise, there has been an increase by $3.9 billion. Right? That is the increase. And this increase is a mere 2.6% increase as compared to the previous year. So is this data important for you to learn? Yes. In case you are, if this question gets asked in the mains examination, if you are able to present this data, it will always make your answer much more representative, much more authentic. Now here, some part of that financing is also going to the marine protection and the protection of the marine environment. But here, that is very, very less. It is only around 9 billion US dollars, which represents close to around 9%, 8 to 9% of the overall flow. So that is not significant enough, because as per estimates, we have to increase the funding close to around $380 billion by the year 2024 in order to achieve our goals for the protection of the environment to combat climate change. So we need to increase this funding drastically. Can that be possible? Can the governments of the world spare that much amount of money? So the answer is both yes as well as no. Why it is yes and why it is no? Let us understand. So here one of the aspect is that nature negative financial flows. So the governments of the world, they are already spending close to around 1 trillion US dollars, almost around 1 trillion US dollars in funding various different schemes, in funding various different activities, which in a way harm the nature, right? Which are not conducive to the natural protection. So that is what is referred to as nature negative financial flows. So public financial support for nature negative activities. Nature negative activities refer to what? It refers to activities for which harm the nature in the long run. Right? That is what is nature negative activities. Right? And when we say nature negative financial flows, it indicates that when you are financing such activities, for example, the agricultural subsidies that we provide, not only in India but across the world, many of the times these agricultural subsidies that we provide, it ends up encouraging a kind of an unsustainable agricultural practice. How? It leads to unsustainability. How? We take the example of one of the most common crops that you come across, even in our country and across the world as well. We take the example of rice. Now, rice as a crop, it is planted how? How is it that rice is grown? Basically, what do? You flood that field, the farmland, and you have standing water. In that standing water, you plant the saplings, and eventually the saplings will thrive, the saplings will grow into the plants, into the paddy crop, and then it is harvested. But are you aware that in order to produce 1 kg of rice, 1 kg of rice, we end up consuming close to around 5 kiloliters of water. At the same time, in the case of rice, when we talk about the kind of agricultural practices that are followed everywhere, you would observe this in various parts of the country, that rice or the paddy fields, you will find that they are inundated with water. So all that water, when it evaporates, it releases a lot of methane into the atmosphere. So flood irrigation leads to what? It leads to methane emission. And methane, I hope that we are aware, methane is one of the most powerful greenhouse gases which are responsible for global warming, second only to carbon dioxide. So our agricultural practices, which the governments of the day they provide subsidy for, those agricultural practices, they are having a negative impact on the nature. So that is a nature negative activity, isn't it? So the solution of it, should we stop growing rice altogether? No. We should have better methodologies of production which does not involve so much of resources and exploitation of so much of resources. Another example of agricultural subsidy proving to be unsustainable. For example, you get subsidies for fertilizers, isn't it? A lot of subsidies are provided for fertilizers to be applied on the farmland. Now, these fertilizers, what do? First of all, they will pollute the nearby farmland, as nearby ponds and water bodies as well. So that leads to an activity which we refer to as eutrophication, right? Eutrophication, in that case, those of you who are unaware about the details of eutrophication, you would identify it with those conditions of lakes and ponds around you. And this is present all around the country, north to south, east to west, whether you are in Jammu Kashmir, whether you are in Kanyakumari, whether in Gujarat or Arunachal Pradesh, you will observe this. You would have observed some or the few lakes which have a green film or a green layer on top. That is a polluted water. So the fertilizers that you apply in the farmland, oftentimes it penetrates, it seeps through into the nearby water body, pollutes it. And the fertilizers, the farmers are applying as much as they want. Why? Because it is available at a subsidized rate. At the same time, the fertilizers and over application of it also makes the soil infertile. So again, it is a nature negative financial flow. So every year, the governments, they are spending close to around 500 to around 1 or 1100 billion dollars every year. Why? In order to fund these nature negative activities. So we can preserve or conserve some amount of resource from here, and we can give for nature positive activities, nature-based solutions. So yes, the public sector or the government's role in increasing the funding amount, that can always increase. But at the same time, you need more private participation as well. So both or overall availability of funds has to increase, right? Then you need better participation from private sector. Yes, Abhishek, that is the case. Private sector. Then other than that, you need more funds, share of funds being allocated. Where and why? Being allocated to marine protection. Right? And you need more diverse application of nature-based solutions even across urban settings. reduction of nature negative financial flows. So these are the things which we can do, which we can implement going ahead into the future, which will provide a better conservation standard for the nature around us. For example, fuel subsidies that the governments provide. That again is a nature negative solution, a nature negative financial flow. So those activities should be curtailed and we should go for sustainable development. So sustainability comes in various aspects: sustainable agriculture, sustainable maintenance of the ecosystem, sustainability of biodiversity, prevention of introduction of alien invasive species. All that, if you take into flow and into consideration, that gives you a way forward that the world can basically implement. Overall, you have to understand that availability of funds has to increase almost by 100% to meet the goals. Okay. So that is very, very important. This way forward is what you have to write when you are putting it through in the mains answer. Always understand, in any kind of mains questions that you face, the way forward when it comes to particularly environment, ecology, agriculture, in these areas, way forward is a very important component of your mains answer writing. So this topic we have seen overall. What is it that we have seen? We have seen what is this report, who releases this report, what does this report talk about, the findings of the report. We have talked about nature-based solution, the examples of positive nature-based solution, the examples of nature negative financial flows, and we have also looked at what is it that we can do moving ahead. Okay, now when we come to the next topic, that is again important, that is ozone hole recovery. Now, before we talk about it, that ozone hole recovery, I hope that we understand what do we mean by ozone. Ozone is an oxygen molecule which consists of 3 atoms of oxygen, O3, right? You have 3 atoms of oxygen in that molecule, that is O3. So here, this is what is ozone, and this is present at the ground level also as a pollutant, but this is beneficial when it is present in upper layers of atmosphere. So that is the ozone, the normal oxygen that we take in, that is O2, right? That is the normal oxygen that we take in. So basically, when we talk about ozone hole recovery, again, this is relevant both for your prelims as well as mains. Now, how is it relevant for your prelims? You can be asked a question with regards to the recovery, if it is happening, or you can get a statement that the ozone hole has been increasing in size continuously for the past decade or so. So the trend of recovery, that is something where you can have a question which is asked. Then other than that, you can get questions with regards to the associated protocols. That is Montreal Protocol. Right, you can get an associated question in the prelims. Generally, this is the pattern that UPSC follows. Any portion of current affairs which is in discussion, which is present and has been in a lot of debate, etc., you will find that a static portion related to that static portion oftentimes is asked in the examination. So that is where you can expect a prelims based question on this. In the mains examination, you have questions with regards to ozone depletion and recovery. Okay, so the basic question with regards to it as well can be asked, or you can get a question with regards to what is the benefit of Montreal Protocol, what is the benefit of the Kigali Amendment which followed it, that kind of means question you can get. So for example, rather than writing it on the slide, I hope that you are smart enough to understand it. You can get a question which will be framed something like that: the Montreal Protocol has been a success story. Elaborate. So when you get this kind of a question, you have to talk about the entire process of ozone hole recovery. So as you can see on the image, the graph here, which is published by NASA. So you will find that in the 70s, you did not have significant amount of ozone hole, but slowly and steadily, from the 80s onwards, from the late 80s onwards, due to huge amount of pollution which happened through the 70s and the 80s, you had a large ozone hole created. And that ozone hole slowly is recovering. It is expected to recover completely almost to the 1970s scale by the year that we reach to 2065. Okay, that is something which is expected. Now, when we talk about ozone hole, I hope that we are able to understand ozone hole is created where? In the region of stratosphere, right? Immediately above troposphere, you have stratosphere where you have a thick ozone layer. Now, when we talk about ozone hole, it does not mean that in that region there's a hole which has been punctured and ozone is completely absent. Ozone will be present, but its concentration will reduce in these areas. What this would actually look like if you take a look at the horizontal picture of it. So ozone would be present in other areas. In the region where you see the hole, the concentration of ozone would reduce drastically. Right. So here you have a reduced concentration of ozone. Concentration of ozone. Now, how do you measure the concentration of ozone? So ozone is measured, the concentration of it is measured in terms of a unit that we refer to as Dobson unit. Dobson unit basically talks about the concentration of ozone in a region. So as you will observe, the concentration of ozone in this area in particular has been reducing since the 80s, and then since the past decade almost, it has shown a sign of an improvement, and it is expected if the current trends will continue, the ozone hole will recover completely by the next few decades that we come across. Now, why is it that this topic is in discussion? So here, Scientific Assessment Panel to the Montreal Protocol on Ozone Hole Depletion and Ozone Depleting Substances, their quadrennial assessment report. Quadrennial means what? Released every 4 years. Released every 4 years. Okay, so this quadrennial assessment report basically confirms the phase out of nearly 99% of the banned ozone depleting substance. So you have certain chemicals which are used generally in the refrigerators, in your air conditioner, coolants, fire extinguishers. So in those areas, you have certain kinds of chemicals which are put under the category of chlorofluorocarbons, right? They are put under the category of chlorofluorocarbons, which we also refer to as CFCs. Right? So these CFCs, they have been put under increased use in various different processes and equipments that we end up using in our day-to-day life. So these CFCs, they form an important portion of the ozone depleting substance. So it has been found out that these substances, which were banned since the Montreal Protocol, that incredibly all the various different countries are phasing it out. There's an exception here as well, which I shall be talking about slightly later. So if the current policies remain in place, the ozone layer is expected to recover to the 1980 values. What is this 1980 values? What do we mean by values here? It talks about the concentration. Right. So the concentration will improve by around 2066 over the Antarctic, by 2045 over the region of the Arctic, and by around 2040 for the rest of the world. So the rest of the world, the ozone will be healed much faster as compared to the Arctic, and as compared to the Antarctic, it will be slightly delayed. Now here you might get a question, a random question in your mind. It won't be asked by UPSC, however, but you might get a random question in your head, a curiosity, that why is it that in all the other areas where the pollution is happening, you are saying it will recover by 2040, but in the region of Antarctica, you are saying that it will recover by 2066? That is because over the region of Antarctica, the ozone hole which gets created, that is very extensive. And why is that? There are certain geographical properties associated with the region of Antarctica, in the sense that Antarctica is a very large continental landmass. So there you have a stability of air above it. All around the region of Antarctica, when you talk about upper atmosphere, there's a kind of a circulation of wind pattern, a kind of a circulation of sorts. So in this circulation, the pollutants which come from the rest of the earth as a part of the air circulation, that pollutant gets trapped in. And due to extremely low temperatures, you have the formation of the polar stratospheric clouds, or PSCs, in the region of the lower stratosphere and upper troposphere, which further initiate the action and the reaction against ozone, and that leads to depletion. That is why, because of the stability of the air circulation around Antarctica, the ozone hole which is created is very extensive and almost very permanent. Okay, so always keep that in mind. No, it is different from polar vortex. Polar vortex is slightly different. So that is where in the region of Antarctica you have this circulation created. Now, why is it that the ozone, and how is it that the depletion of ozone happens? Why is it that ozone hole is created in the first place? So ozone hole is created in the region of the ozonosphere because of the activities of the solar insolation. And there you have, and I hope that we all are aware that what is the purpose that ozone layer solves. I hope when we talk about the ozone layer and the benefit of it, the ozone layer overall, if we talk about it, let's say this is the ozone layer. So what it does is it ends up reflecting back the ultraviolet rays of the sun, UV rays of the sun. Some part of it is absorbed by the ozone layer itself. Now, what happens when you have pollutants such as CFCs? When they interact with this ozone, what they do is they will break this O3 into O2 plus O. So, ozone is broken down. So that means this elemental oxygen that you have, that will not be able to block the ultraviolet rays. So the basic purpose of the ozone hole is defeated. Here in front of your screen, you get a kind of an absolute procedure which dictates to you, or which tells you how this process spans out, how this depletion takes place. So here, if you will pay attention, you will find that the pollutant, that is CFC11, it is a kind of a pollutant, an ozone hole depleting or ozone depleting substance, which is also referred to as in brief as ODS, ozone depleting substance. Now, this CFC11, when it reaches these levels, it will also interact with the ultraviolet rays of the sun. Now, in the presence of the ultraviolet rays, here, what is the formula of it? It is CFCl3. So it will break in the presence of the ultraviolet rays. When you have the UV rays which fall upon it, that is when it will break and you will have an individual chlorine atom which will separate, and you have CFCl2, which is again a byproduct. While CFCl2 is not so damaging, but this individual chlorine atom, what it will do, it will attack the ozone molecule. And thereby, when it attacks the ozone molecule, it will form ClO, chlorine monoxide, and along with that, it will form an independent oxygen atom. So the reaction will be Cl plus O3, that gives ClO plus O2, right? So you have the ozone which is broken. Now this ClO again basically ends up dissociating with the oxygen, and this will form chlorine plus O. So that means this chlorine is now free to attack another ozone molecule. This is free to attack another ozone molecule. Right? So like this, a chain reaction is initiated where one after the other, the ozone molecules are consistently destroyed. They are consistently damaged. So that overall leads to the reduction of ozone concentration in the atmosphere. So the chain reaction reduces with, or basically reduces the concentration of ozone. Now here you might get another question in your mind. How is it that this ozone is created in the first place in this region? So the ozone is created in this region by the process of oxygen molecules getting exposed to ultraviolet rays. That is when the oxygen molecules combine to form O3, right? So it is a natural process, but it is a very slow process. So here, when we say it is a natural process, then you might say, then what is the problem? Ozone is created naturally as well. So even if the concentration reduces, that can be fulfilled. But then this rate of destruction of ozone is much, much faster at the rate which, or compared to the rate with which the ozone layer can replenish itself. It is because of this difference in the speed of creation and destruction that we end up getting a kind of an ozone hole. Okay, so that is where you have to put a ban, and that ban has been imposed since the Montreal Protocol on the use of these ozone depleting substances. That is where the Montreal Protocol, which for the first time various different countries came together. And basically the first time, if you take a look at the chronology of it, I always say, and as famous leaders always say, chronology, understanding the chronology is important. So if you take a look at the chronology of it, it was in 1985 when for the first time different countries came together under the purview of what we now refer to as the Vienna Convention. And there they talked about the depletion of the ozone layer and the creation of an ozone hole. That materialized into 1987 when various different countries came together and they signed the Montreal Protocol. And that basically, after that, ozone depleting substances, they were banned from day-to-day practice and day-to-day use. So that is where there is a benefit associated with it that we are able to see today. Now, this ozone hole recovery, will it have an impact on climate change? Absolutely yes. So basically it is expected that it will help us reduce the rise of temperature by almost around 0.5 degrees Celsius, right? So it is the recovery is expected to reduce the rise of temperature by by almost 0.5 degrees Celsius, which is massive. Okay, so that is the expectation. Now, this is going to obviously help. So that brings our focus to the protocols which have been put into the place. So Montreal Protocol, the 1987 Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer and its succeeding amendments. You had various different amendments to the Montreal Protocol. You had the London Amendment, you had the Beijing Amendment, you had the Copenhagen Amendment. All these amendments, they brought in various other substances which also were banned because it was found out that these substances also are depleting the ozone layer directly or indirectly. So all these subsequent amendments, they finally succeeded to control the consumption and production of ozone depleting substances like CFCs and also HFCs, that is hydrofluorocarbons. Hydrofluorocarbons are the ones, basically, these HFCs initially were cited as a solution, as a way out, as an alternative. That, see, we cannot use CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons because they are depleting the ozone. So why don't we use HFCs? This was promulgated. But after the world started using HFCs, it was realized that while they are not depleting the ozone layer directly, but then these HFCs, they are important greenhouse gas. Important greenhouse gas. This is a very, very relevant and important greenhouse gas in terms of it, that it contributes majorly to the rise in temperature across the globe. So that is where Montreal Protocol has indeed been a success. And more than this protocol, the Kigali Amendment to this protocol, first of all, I hope that we are aware that what is a protocol, what is a convention, the difference between them. I hope that we are aware. For those who are not aware, in a convention, you set a larger objective without any set parameters or set targets that you have to meet. In the case of a protocol, whether you talk about Kyoto Protocol, whether you talk about Montreal Protocol, in the case of the protocol, you have designated targets which the countries and the members have to meet. Right? For example, reduction or banning out the substances by this year, or by XYZ year, we will reduce the concentration. So you have a set target in front of you. In the case of a convention, it is like few of you getting together, having tea in the evening and evening snacks and saying, we will succeed in civil services. Think about it as a convention. And a few of you get together and you say, we will succeed in the civil services examination by in this year 2023. So that becomes a protocol that you have to implement. So that is the minor difference which is involved. Okay. Now this HFCs raises the temperature. Okay, so this is again important to be curbed out. And basically, that is where the Kigali Amendment, that which came into force on 1st of January 2019, even though this Kigali Amendment was signed in 2016, that Kigali Amendment is considered to be a very landmark amendment in terms of bringing more realistic targets to the Montreal Protocol. So here, the Kigali Amendment has set different targets for various groups of nations. For example, developed countries, they will reduce HFC consumption initiating in 2019 itself. Most developing countries, such as China, etc., their consumption has to be frozen by the year 2024. After that, frozen means what? Freeze consumption means what? That going ahead in the future, the consumption should not exceed that limit. What you have been using in 2024, that limit should not be exceeded in 2026 or 2030 or 2040. That should be your peak utilization. Similarly, developing countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., they will have to freeze consumption in 2028. Beyond that, it won't peak. So that is where the Kigali Amendment has also come into work. It has also benefited. Now, here, one thing you have to understand that, in this report, in the previous report, it was found out that despite the entire world banning the CFCs and the use and production of it, it was found out that somewhere in the world, still, these CFCs are being released. And more particularly, the CFC that we have talked about, that is CFC 11. It was found that somewhere in the world, this CFC 11 is still being released, which is damaging the atmosphere and is damaging the ozone continuously. So nowadays, you have satellite data, so there is no place to hide. It was found out it is released from somewhere in eastern part of Asia. Again, further investigation was done, and the culprit was something which everyone expected. It was China. What China was doing in small towns, in certain small areas, it was still packing those CFC 11s into the air conditioners and refrigerants, and it was supplying to the world at a cheaper price, right? So the various governments of the day, they became active, and now, at least now, they are saying that usage has also been stopped by China. So that is where slowly and steadily, because the entire world has endeavored in the same direction, that has made Montreal Protocol a success. This is one of those only protocols which you can refer to as a kind of a success story. And that is something which we are able to see in the case of recovery of the ozone hole. So the question that you can expect from this is that Montreal Protocol has indeed been a hard work, but a successful one. Elaborate. So that kind of a question you can expect from here. Okay. Now, then we come to the next topic, that is cryomesh. That is the freezing of the corals. Cryo. Whenever you come across the term cryo, it always refers to freezing. Okay. So that is what cryo represents, freezing. Right? Guys, I hope that you are able to take down the questions that I'm talking. I hope that you have a pen and paper in front of you. Do this kind of a exercise. Physical exercise is sometimes good, right? So even though the question is not mentioned in the PPT, I hope that much work will be done by you. Okay. The way forward for ozone hole recovery, we are already in the way forward. We have already banned ozone hole recovery is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. So there is no way forward in the good thing, right? So continuing the same process as we have been following, that will lead us to success. Okay. Now, here, when we talk about freezing, right? So what is this cryomesh? So the corals that we have, they particularly, the scientists in Australia, they have succeeded in freezing large portions of the coral reefs, obviously in labs, and the purpose and the utility of it is very simple. When you have achieved that kind of a freezing exercise, then you can reintroduce it into the biodiversity later on for them to be thriving again. Because the corals, they undergo various different in a way adverse circumstances. They face various different adverse circumstances where they have to experience bleaching action and so on, and that is detrimental for the coral life. So that is why for a long period of time, the scientists across the globe, they have been endeavoring really, really hard in order to protect the corals. How do we protect the corals? Now, when we talk about Australia, in Australia, we have the Great Barrier Reef. Barrier Reef. It is one of the largest coral reefs, in fact, the largest coral reef, spanning across almost 2,500 kilometers to the northeastern coast of Australia. So observe this in the map next time that you get a chance to open up a map. Observe this. It is present across the northeast coast of Australia. Right? Now, before proceeding into the aspect that what is coral bleaching, why that coral bleaching happens, and then we will understand why that cryomesh, what is this cryomesh, how does it help us? First of all, a very brief about what do we mean by corals. What do we understand by corals? So corals belong to the phyla of animals. I hope we are aware of that. Now, this image that you see, this is a kind of a reef, right? All of them showing different hues, different coloration, different patterns. But this is made up of individual coral polyp. So the reefs, they are made up of coral polyps. They are made up of coral polyps. Now these coral polyps, they belong to the taxa animals. Right. Now, these animals or these corals, basically, if you look at their basic structure, the basic structure is very, very simple, like that of an hydra or a hydral species, where you have various different tentacles attached to the corals. You have various different tentacles which are attached, which are associated. And these are fixated on the ground surface. Here you will have a mouth. From here you have the ingestion for the digestive tract. Now what happens is that these corals, they are sticking to the sea floor, isn't it? You can see they are sticking to the sea floor. Now these tentacles, what they do is they trap any moving particles, the moving salts, nutrients, etc., and they take in. But the food is not enough. So they face the scarcity of food, the situation of scarcity of food. So for that, in order to get rid of that, they get into a kind of a mutually beneficial relationship with the algae. So here, what they do is they get into a kind of a mutually beneficial relationship with the algae. And this algal species, that basically sticks itself to the tentacles of the corals. Now this algal species, that is what provides the various different beautiful hues of coloration pattern that you generally associate with the corals, that you have various different hues of green, blue, orange, pink, violet, any color that you can think of, you'll find that. All of that is attributed to this algal species, which we refer to as zooxanthellae. Now, what this zooxanthellae does, it carries out the process of production of food. How? By carrying out photosynthesis. By carrying out photosynthesis, it undergoes or undertakes the production of food. And that food is basically required, right? That food is basically required by this coral, and that is why the algal species are there. Now, what happens is when you have adverse circumstances, these algal species either they die or they simply move away. Their productivity reduces. And then the corals, which are primarily these coral polyps, which are primarily constituted of, or they have a large proportion of calcium carbonate around them, they have the whitish color, pale white in appearance. So that is something that is observable after the algae dies. And when this pale white coral comes and is appearing, that is when we refer to it as coral bleaching. We'll take a look at all of these in detail, don't worry about it. So that coral bleaching means the death of corals after some time. The corals are vulnerable to diseases, they get a lack of food, and they die after some time. And when the corals die, the marine environment is damaged unlike anything else. Why? because even though these corals, they occupy less than 10% of the oceanic space, they support close to 90% of the biodiversity of the oceans. I will repeat, even though these corals, they occupy less than 10% of the oceanic space, they provide support to more than 90% of the marine biodiversity. So if the corals die, that can spell disaster for the marine biodiversity as well. So that is where we need to preserve these corals. Okay. Now, scientists hope to save the Great Barrier Reef by freezing and storing the coral larvae. This unique ecosystem is under threat from coral bleaching and invasive species. This image that you see, this is the image that you have of the Great Barrier Reef. In the past few years, the Great Barrier Reef, many portions of it has undergone bleaching almost 4 to 5 times. Earlier, that used to be an event which would happen maybe once every 10 years or maybe once every 50 years. But now, due to climate change, due to pollution and other factors, this coral bleaching is happening at an increased rate. So the corals are getting depleted at an alarming rate. Now, if the diversity of the corals, now even in these corals, you will have multiple different types of species, multiple different types of varieties. You need to protect that genetic diversity of the corals as well. That is where we have the system of cryomesh, which will freeze the larvae of that diverse species. For example, I'll give you an analogy. I hope that you are aware that off the coast of Norway, we have a small island. Explore it in the map if possible. We have a small island that is Svalbard. Right? We have a small island that is Svalbard off the coast of Norway. Now, what is the purpose of Svalbard? Anyone who is aware of it? What is the purpose and why is Svalbard used? Hanrao, very good. Akash, Athira, Amit, Adil, Abhishek, very, very good. So this is where we end up storing all the food grains. Food grains are stored, or not food grains, rather, seeds. Seeds are stored at very low temperature. All the varieties of seeds, the domestic variety of rice, wheat, millets, pulses, everything is stored in a seed vault there. Why it is stored? So that if the climate change becomes very disastrous, if let's say there is some untoward incident happening across the planet, then you can later on reintroduce these seeds and allow for the growth and maintenance of biodiversity. On a similar scale, this cryomesh technology that has come up, that is also aiming to achieve the same thing, whereby you are freezing and storing the coral larvae. Right? Larval stage is the initial inception stage of the any particular species, any particular animal. That larva grows into that animal. So that is where the cryomesh attempts to do the same thing in order to protect the biodiversity around corals. Now, why it is done? In order to mitigate, or in order to have an alternative method for coral bleaching, in the sense of how to fight coral bleaching. This is what coral bleaching looks like. If you will observe all around it, the corals have a coloration pattern, but this coral that you see, this has been bleached. This has been bleached. Why? So coral bleaching happens because of a variety of reasons. So that is where I have attached a kind of a chart here for your benefit. So first of all, any minute change in ocean temperature, right? Any minute change in ocean temperature, refer to this chart, guys. This is something which will always help you for your mains examination. Okay, this includes what is coral bleaching, what are the reasons and the causes of coral bleaching, everything you will get here. So ocean temperature, if it rises, then coral bleaching happens. Then due to pollution, marine pollution, oil spill, plastic pollution, coastal pollution, everything leads to bleaching activities. Then extremely low tides and overexposure to sunlight or overexposure to even ultraviolet rays sometimes leads to bleaching. And in the process of bleaching, you will observe that a healthy coral which is present there, the productivity starts to reduce. It becomes stressed. And many of the algal species you will observe here, let me choose a different color. Many of the algal species you will observe, which were earlier present and sticking around the coral, many of the algal species, they are simply moving away. Right? So in that case, eventual result is a bleached coral. This kind of a coral where you don't have any algal species associated with it. So in that case, what happens? Now the coral will be starved of food. Coral will not have enough food. So what will it do? It will be exposed to diseases as well. It will be exposed to starvation as well. And the corals eventually die. And that will have an adverse impact on biodiversity as well. So without the algae, the coral loses its major source of food, which turns white, very pale, and is more susceptible to damage. So in the region of Great Barrier Reef, which is visible from space extending across around 2,500 kilometers, that is something which is in danger. Even when the sea surface temperature is not rising significantly, Great Barrier Reef is being damaged. Those of you who have been very familiar with current affairs over the past year and a half, you would be aware that Adani had bought a kind of a coal mine, the Carmichael coal mine in the Queensland province of Australia. But the locals did not allow the mining to happen for a long time. Why? Because it was estimated and expected that the pollution caused by it will damage the coral ecosystem. So that is basically the coral bleaching which has been happening in the barrier reef. So that can significantly impact the biodiversity in that entire area. So that is where the need to freeze the corals comes in. So here, the cryogenically frozen coral can be stored and later it can be reintroduced in the wild, but the current process requires sophisticated equipment, including lasers, to achieve the same. However, the new cryo mesh, what is a mesh? Mesh is a kind of a structure somewhat like this, right? So in a cryo mesh, which can be manufactured cheaply and it is able to preserve the genetic diversity of the coral. So when we say better preserves the coral, it is able to protect. Yes, Haripriya, that is correct. Able to protect the genetic diversity of the corals. Right? This will allow us to store the corals at a low temperature of close to around minus 196 degrees Celsius, which will preserve the basic DNA and it can be later reintroduced. So earlier this has been practiced on a smaller scale in the region of Hawaii, but that turned out to be a failure. That is why this experiment gains importance, because it is for the first time that it has been implemented on a very large scale and it can lead to ecosystem restoration. Okay, so that is basically the aspect of this cryo mesh, and that holds a very bright future going ahead when it comes to the coral reef. So the question that you can expect out of this, I will write it down, because I see many of you have that write it down in the slide. Don't tell me, write it down in the slide. So the question that can be asked is that what is coral bleaching? Right? Elaborate the impact of cryomesh technology to mitigate the same. Okay, this can be for 10 marks, 150 words. Okay, now that I have written, all those who have been constantly wondering that I don't care what he is explaining, I want the written questions. So I hope you can take a sigh of relief. I hope now you are satisfied. Okay. What if corals never come under stress? The algae will never leave, but that is a perfect scenario. It is a scenario that what if I start preparation from month of May and I clear the prelims, I clear the mains, and I clear the interview. You will become IAS officer, but it is very unrealistic. That is why the corals will come under stress. Okay, right. Is cryomesh first of its technology to protect coral larvae? Not the first of its technology, but technology on such a large scale, implementable on such a large scale. Yes. What is the use of corals, Rahul? Basically, corals are referred to as the rainforests of underwater or marine ecosystem. So these algae, they carry out photosynthesis. So in the process of photosynthesis, what happens? You absorb carbon dioxide, isn't it? So carbon dioxide is removed from the ocean, so it prevents ocean acidification from happening. It also absorbs atmospheric carbon dioxide, so it helps fight global warming. At the same time, the process of photosynthesis produces oxygen, so it replenishes oxygen supply in the ocean, which is required by the various species. At the same time, it also provides food and shelter for a variety of species, maintenance of biodiversity. So the uses of corals are multifarious. It supports close to around 500 million people directly and indirectly by fishing activities, by tourism activities. That is where the role of corals is humongous. Okay. Santosh, your question is that coral live in which type of water? So, my dear friend, you have different types of corals. You have hard corals, soft corals, etc. So, you have majority of the corals are warm water corals, which will be present, which will have that zooxanthellae population, which will be present closer to the surface. They are the ones impacted by climate change significantly. But at the same time, you have certain cold water corals which exist at the sea floor, about which we don't know that much, because recent findings have shown us some glimpse about these corals, that they exist without the zooxanthellae, and only by the tentacles they are able to capture food. You have cold water corals, for example, the corals of the Ross Reef, in the case of Ross Reef off the coast of Norway. That is again one of the large cold water corals that you have. Okay? Yes, the black coral. Now we come to pharmaceutical pollution. So I hope we are aware about what this pharmaceutical refers to, right? The medicines that we have, that we chug in almost on a daily basis during the winter season. Some or the other person will get sick. You chug in those those pills. So we here talk about pharmaceutical pollution. Till now, you would have heard and read about air pollution, water pollution, noise pollution, different types of pollutions. This is pharmaceutical pollution. So what happens here? Understand it. It is a very basic thing. But here again, you can get a question from mains. So I will write the question here first of all before anyone gets confused that what is the question that he's referring to. I'll write the question here. So, what is pharma pollution? Discuss the impact on human health and biodiversity. Right. Great Barrier Reef is a warm water coral. Okay. Discuss the impact on human health and biodiversity. Now, what is this pharmaceutical pollution? So basically what has been found out is that various different industries and factories which produce these pharmaceutical drugs, not all of them are treated perfectly when it comes to the waste which is generated by these pharmaceutical companies. And the wastewater is found to be including and consisting of many of these pharmaceutical ingredients, which later on, in a way of sewage water as they are passed on, and eventually, let's say, to the lakes or the ponds and any other area, freshwater region, these pharmaceutical ingredients which are present, they end up killing the naturally occurring microbial population in your sewage system, in the large pools, etc. Now here, ideally, a common individual will think that it is good only that these pharmaceuticals, they are going and they are killing microorganisms. Microorganisms are always bad. So it is not so. Because when you have these pharmaceutical ingredients killing the microorganisms, many of them are decomposers. They play a significant role in decomposing the sewage matter. When these organisms, they die, then the sewage is no longer decomposed properly. And that sewage, along with those pharmaceutical ingredients, that finds its way into the biodiversity and the food web. That leads to long-term problems. How? Let's take a look at it. So the context of it, around 43% of the world's rivers are contaminated with APIs or active pharmaceutical ingredients, which form a very important constituent in the and a composition in the case of drug manufacturing, in concentrations that adversely impacts the health and biodiversity. Okay, so around 43% of the world's rivers are contaminated with this. So understand the chronology. So you have the factory, right? You have the discharge of waste. Now this discharge of waste will consist of what? It will consist of drugs and APIs. APIs is mentioned here, guys. This is API that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about any other API. Now these APIs kill the microbes in the sewage, ponds, rivers, etc. Right? As a result of this, wastes are not decomposed properly. As a result of that, wastes and APIs enter food chain. Right? These APIs, they will also enter food chain. So when they enter the food chain, right, not only will they impact the organisms at each and every level, but it also develops a kind of an unwanted antimicrobial resistance. So that is where you will find in many of the areas when people get sick nowadays, we have an increased antimicrobial resistance that we have developed. What is this antimicrobial resistance? So in simpler terms, let's say you are suffering from cough and cold, right? Which is a very common occurrence during this time of the year, very cold conditions. So let's say you are suffering from cough and cold. You take a pill, any tablet, you take in, ingest, and next morning you are fit and fine. So that medicine has worked for you. Let's say you have been taking in and chugging in that medicine almost every few months, and that too for continuity of time. So after some point, you will find that the medicine is not helping you anymore. It is not helping you that kind of build up that resistance. So that is where it is the antimicrobial resistance. The microbes also, they become resistant to the antibiotics. So then when you get sick, so then you will have to be administered a higher grade of antibiotics. And that is harmful for your system as well. So why does this happen? Over a period of time, when you have a kind of a rampant ingestion of these antibiotics, you'll find many of us in India especially, this is a common feature where even if we don't know the routes to a way, if you find anyone and you tell them that, I am suffering from stomach ache, I am having headache, they will prescribe you 2 to 3 medicines like this only, that take this, you will be fine. They will prescribe you antibiotics. So we end up taking in a lot of antibiotics. So the microbes, the disease causing microbes, over a period of time, when they get exposed to this antibiotics, they develop a kind of a resistance. That is when these medicines, they stop working anymore. And that is when the conditions, they become very dire. So this is what happens when you ingest these APIs, which become a part of your food chain. So here, when we talk about the impact of it, first of all, the impact on fish and aquatic life. So number of various different birth control pills, they consist of estrogen, right? Now, this estrogen, which is also released into the wastewater because of the pills, the factories which produce them, right? Postmenopausal hormone treatments, etc., where these estrogen is used. So, as a waste, this is also secreted. Now, when that is secreted, it damages the male population in significant manner, male population of the fishes and other aquatic life. So it, in a way, has an impact on the male to female ratio in the aquatic life, which is, in a way, unsustainable for the long run. In the long run, the population production, that comes to a halt. Now, that is one of the direct impacts. Then you have the effect on drinking water as well. Drinking water gets contaminated. Right? What is estrogen? Estrogen is a hormone. Estrogen is a hormone which is naturally secreted by the human body, but then this is also used significantly as an input for manufacturing certain drugs. So the drinking water also gets contaminated. And when you ingest that drinking water, obviously health impacts, disruption of sewage treatment process. So decomposition does not happen perfectly. Now, these are the immediate impacts, but you have long-term impacts in the form of bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Biomagnification. Okay. Now, what is bioaccumulation and biomagnification? It is the process by which the contaminants, their concentration increases overall. In the case of the food chain, how slowly and steadily their concentration builds up. That is what is bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Again, I have attached this chart. This is for National Geographic. Please do utilize this, guys. This will be relevant again for your mains examination. I hope You are not keeping all these PPTs and charts in a saved folder somewhere, that one fine day when the sun rises in the west now, and one fine day when the Prime Minister will come to my home, that is when I will study all the older PPTs. I hope you are not doing that. For revision purposes, please utilize it. So when we talk about biomagnification, it is different from bioaccumulation. How? First of all, let us take a look at biomagnification. In the case of biomagnification, slowly and steadily, the pollutants and their concentration increases as it passes through the food chain. Let us understand the process. So, here, the definition of it is toxins increase in concentration as they are passed up the food chain. Their concentration level increases, the contamination increases. How? Let's take the example of a PCB, that is polychlorinated biphenyl, which is a contaminant, which is a pollutant. Now, let's suppose this contaminant enters the ocean in small quantities but is distributed over a large area. Now, as this contaminant enters as a part of the industrial waste, it is absorbed by phytoplanktons, which is again a species of marine algae. Phytoplanktons. Now, when it impacts the phytoplanktons, these phytoplanktons will absorb it. Now, these phytoplanktons are consumed by a species that we refer to as zooplankton. Zooplankton. Right? Zooplankton consumes these phytoplanktons in very large numbers, in very large quantities. So that is when, even though the phytoplanktons absorb tiny amount of this PCB, zooplanktons over a period of time, they end up accumulating a lot of this pollutant. So the zooplankton, let's say one zooplankton, that consumes hundreds of phytoplanktons. So overall the concentration level increases in that individual zooplankton, isn't it? So, like this, the concentration level increases as we move from phytoplankton to zooplankton. Now, these zooplanktons are consumed in large number by the small fish. One small fish might end up consuming thousands of zooplanktons. So each one of them had consumed many of the phytoplankton. So if you observe, the level of contamination is increasing from phytoplankton to zooplankton to the small fishes. The level of contamination is increasing. Now, many of these small fishes are consumed by large apex predators. So eventually, the phytoplanktons which had absorbed small quantities, by the time that contaminant reaches the apex predators, its contamination level goes skyrocketing and is very high. So that is when the concentration significantly increases. It magnifies overall. So this is what is biomagnification, where as you move to the food chain, it gets magnified. Okay. Then what is bioaccumulation? Bioaccumulation is that if you keep consuming the same polluted source again and again and again and again and again over a period of time, the level of contaminant in your body, that will increase. For example, let's suppose when we talk about a plant or a crop, right? Let's suppose a plant or a crop which is used in a way or which is used for consumption purposes, and there you have applied insecticide. Now, insecticide to treat it, fertilizers, etc., chemical fertilizers. Now, if you keep on consuming this again and again and again, so there the pollutants, the level of pollutant, the level of contamination keeps on increasing. That is bioaccumulation. So this API and the pharmaceutical pollution, that pharmaceutical pollution will slowly and steadily build up the level of contaminants in our human bodies as well. And that can bring about a kind of a resistant microbes. Antimicrobial resistance will be built up. And that would mean it will be much more difficult to fight off the diseases that can be cured naturally as well. So that is where pharmaceutical pollution is a major issue, and almost half of the rivers of the world is affected by that. Even in our country, you have many rivers which have been influenced by this pharmaceutical pollution. For example, you have smaller streams which move around in the region of Himachal and Uttarakhand, and there you have many pharmaceutical industries which are situated. Many of these small streams end up joining mighty rivers such as Ganga and Yamuna. Also, in the case of Gujarat, you have river Sabarmati which flows through. That also manages to create that level of pollution. So that is where it has got a long-term impact overall. Okay. Now, that is basically the pharmaceutical pollution. Now, again, another important portion. This is for science and tech. So that is the fusion energy breakthrough. So recently, in nuclear fusion and the area of nuclear fusion, we have achieved a kind of a landmark breakthrough. We as in the human race, not we Indians. This has been achieved in United States. So here, what can be the question which will be asked? Let me write it down first of all, and so that, again, the grievance is taken care of. What is nuclear fusion? What, or rather, discuss the future prospects in case of fusion energy and its viability in order to provide endless or source of clean energy. So this can be a question which can be asked. So here you have to be aware what is fusion. You don't have to be confused with nuclear fission and fusion. So that is again something that we will take a look at. So after a long period of time, there has been a breakthrough which has been achieved in the case of nuclear fusion. In simple terms, what is fission and what is fusion? Okay. What is fission and what is fusion? In simple terms, not the exact difference one by one I am going to count, but in simple terms, what do we understand by the difference? So here you have one molecule, larger and heavier molecule is split to give energy and heat. In this, you have two light molecules combine to form one larger molecule, and in the process lot of energy is and heat is a form of energy itself is released. Okay, so if you have ever wondered, in case you have never wondered, life is always beautiful, ignorance is bliss. But in case you have ever wondered that how is it that sun is able to produce so much heat, So sun, the energy produced in the sun that you observe, that is carried out through nuclear fusion, where two light molecules of hydrogen, they will combine to produce helium. In that process, heat is released. Now, this does not happen naturally, that if you have hydrogen molecules in the room, they will automatically combine to produce helium and they will give you a lot of energy. No. This is not a natural process. This is an induced process overall, whereby under high temperature and under heavy pressure conditions, this is carried out. So a major breakthrough has been announced in the race to recreate nuclear fusion. The entire world has been working really, really hard to build a sustainable fusion technology. Because this sustainable fusion technology, we have seen in the case of sun, that it has been providing energy continuously for billions of years now. So fusion can have that prolonged longevity in terms of availability of clean energy. It will be clean as well, because here you won't have greenhouse gases or fossil fuels which will release energy. So it will be clean energy. So that is why scientists across the world, they have been trying to replicate the aspect of nuclear fusion. That is, in that context, you would have heard about the term of artificial sun being recreated, etc. It is not as if the scientists are trying to build a large sun on the ground. They are trying to replicate the fusion technology. So physicists have pursued the technology for decades, as it promises a potential source for near limitless clean energy. Researchers confirm that they overcame a major barrier. That is, they have finally managed to produce more energy as compared to the amount of energy they would consume to produce that fusion, right? Only then it can be sustainable. Earlier, what used to be the case is, in order to bring that fusion into process, a lot of energy was put in, and that fusion would not give that much energy as an output. So obviously it was not beneficial. Now, why it is referred to as a breakthrough is, now the scientists have been able to generate more energy as compared to the amount that they have put in to carry out that fusion process. That surplus is required to maintain the continuity, to maintain the kind of chain reaction. So what is nuclear fusion? In nuclear fusion, pairs of tiny particles called atoms are heated and forced together to make one heavier atom. Now, it is the opposite of nuclear fission, in which heavy atoms are split apart. Nuclear power stations currently that you have, they use the fission technology to generate electricity, right? Fusion is the process which gives sun the energy. Generally, for fusion technology, you require either lighter atoms like hydrogen or lithium. These are the lighter atoms which are utilized. So how the process works, if you look at it, basically what happens is that hydrogen atoms, they are heated. A lot of heat is provided. And not only heat, huge amount of atmospheric pressure is also provided. So heat and very high pressure. That is something which is provided. Now, under these circumstances, they combine to produce one heavier element, a heavier atom, and a neutron is released, and along with that, there is a lot of energy which is released. This is the clean energy that the world is looking for. Now, in the case of nuclear power plants that we have in use, there is a lot of talk, lot of debate about the fact that whether it is safe or not, right? You have nuclear disasters, Chernobyl in the case of the present day Ukraine, that a nuclear power plant, there a kind of a nuclear leakage, an explosion, etc. happened. So that is one of the accidents, the 3 Mile Island in the case of United States, the Fukushima nuclear disaster in the case of Japan recently in 2011. So all these disasters that you see in the nuclear energy generation, why is it? Because fission is very unpredictable. Nuclear fission which is used in these, that can have a property where it can simply spiral out of control. But fusion is considered safer, because the amount of energy that you are putting in to carry out this fusion process, that energy, if you pull it off, in a way, in simple terms, if you take the plug off, that will never lead to disaster. So that is why it is considered safe. And that can virtually open up many possibilities. It is because of the dangers associated with fusion, that dangers associated with nuclear fission and nuclear power plants, that we see the world in the kind of energy crisis that it is in today, particularly Europe. How? Now, you would be aware that in 2011, Japan faced a major tsunami, and that tsunami damaged the nuclear reactor which was present in Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan. Now, that radioactive leakage which happened, that was disastrous for the local biodiversity. Now, looking at that, Germany, which is a major power consumer of Europe, Germany passed a legislation that, look, nuclear power plants are unsafe. So what we will do, we will phase out nuclear power plants. They have phased out the nuclear power plants. While the other parts of the world, they are trying to bring in nuclear energy, they have phased it out. Now, what has that led to? Energy crisis in Germany, where now they are importing Russian gas, Russian oil to keep the fires burning. And that has led to energy crisis, not only in Europe, but it has spilled across the globe. So, if you have this kind of a safe technology in place, it can mean significantly beneficial for the human race going forward. So, the experiment which was carried out, so the National Ignition Facility in California, basically it is a costly experiment, obviously. What it does is it puts a tiny amount of hydrogen into a small capsule the size of a peppercorn that you have, the black pepper that you have, right? How small the black pepper is, you would have seen, right? So then a powerful 192 beam laser is used to heat and compress the hydrogen fuel in that portion. The laser is so very strong that it can heat the capsule to almost 100 million degrees Celsius, hotter than even the center of the sun, and compress it to more than 100 billion times of the pressure in the Earth's atmosphere. So under these circumstances, under these artificial circumstances, that is when the hydrogen atoms will combine to produce helium, and in the process, they will release energy. So till now, the problem which was present was the fact that the energy which was released was lesser than the energy consumed in these lasers, in the temperature, and in the pressure creation. But now, that is why it is a breakthrough, because now the energy that is released is much more significantly higher than what is the energy consumed for the process. That is why it is referred to as a fusion energy breakthrough. In the whole entirety of this year 23 and 24, let me assure you, this is going to be the topic in discussion. This is going to be very, very relevant topic. More discussions are going to emerge out of it. Okay, now here, when you take a look at it, the advantages of it, the fusion, it is very safe. Chances of disaster is absolutely minimized as compared to the fission technology. It is clean as well. It does not release any greenhouse gas. So that is where it can be a clean energy. And longevity, because here the fusion is carried out by hydrogen, right? Hydrogen you can simply get from water itself, right? So water is available naturally. So that is where you will not run out of resources to carry out nuclear fusion. Right now, what happens? India as a country is interested in producing energy by nuclear fission, but India doesn't have enough uranium reserves. So that is why, if you will recall, few years back, India signed a host of treaties with the international community so that it can import uranium, right, in order to carry out the processes of nuclear power production. So all that complexity will be thrown out of the window. Now, wherever you are, you'll be self-sufficient in terms of resources in order to produce clean energy. So that is the major benefit associated with fusion. That is why the entire world is trying to go for nuclear fusion. Longevity means ease of availability, right? is of availability for a longer period of time. Nuclear fusion, basically the fuel required for it, we have also talked about that the fuel required is hydrogen or lithium in many of the cases. Okay. Now, then coming to the last topic of the day, that is bridging the digital divide. This is a topic which has been asked in the or which has been basically discussed in Kurukshetra's December edition. And this becomes, let me tell you, very, very important for your mains examination, for your GS paper. See, China has not successfully developed the artificial sun. All of you who are talking that it is successful, it has not been successful. Till now, it is in a developmental stage. It has managed to achieve that fusion for a brief few seconds. It has still not attained longevity or a prolonged sustainable production. So that is where China also is working forward. And US has achieved the breakthrough. And this is something which can be utilized in your or can be asked directly in your essay paper. It has been asked in the essay directly in the year 2016. In the year 2017, you had direct questions asked from digital divide. So what is the question that you can get from it? What is digital divide? Discuss the impact on societal inequality created by this. What can or what are, or rather than that, briefly mention the role played by Government of India to fill the gap. Right? So in this kind of a question, first of all, you have to talk about what do we mean by digital divide. Then you have to talk about how it leads to exacerbation or exaggeration of inequality in the society. And then what are the various schemes that the Government of India is initiating or launching in order to ward off the same. Now, digital divide is basically, in simple terms, a classification or division of the society into digital haves and digital have-nots. In what sense? That now, when the digital revolution has happened, where almost everybody has got a smartphone on their hands or laptops, availability of internet and so on, you still have large section of the population who do not have access to these. Now, because majority of the services, governance protocols, etc., and information is also available on these digital media and digital platform, that means those of them who do not have access to it, those of them who are not finding or who are not able to use it, they are at a disadvantage. They get lesser opportunities in terms of utilizing their potential. And that is what is the digital divide. So when we talk about it, so digital inequality or digital divide is referred to as the different levels of access to digital resources. All forms of digital inequality taken together, that is what is referred to as digital disparity. Right? Now, bridging the digital gap requires solutions addressing accessibility, affordability, and digital literacy. What is it? Accessibility. That in many areas now you have seen that there was a huge pump and show and we launched 5G network in India. But still, if you go to many of the rural areas in the country, you still don't have the availability of 2G network, let alone 5G. So accessibility is not there. Only around 70% of the world has got access to internet. And in India, that disparity oftentimes increases significantly because availability of quality internet is almost inescapable in many of the areas. Then affordability. Even if internet is available, is it cheap enough for everyone to be able to afford it? Because if it is not affordable, automatically you are creating a gap in the society where the rich will have the access to digital information, whereas the poor, they will be denied that access. For no fault of their own, they will be denied the information, the governmental role, etc., which they deserve. And then digital literacy, how to operate the digital devices, the information which is available on the internet, how to make use of that. So all that plays a significant role in creating that digital divide. Then here, when we talk about how to achieve inclusive internet for all, then you have various different methods to do it. First of all, infrastructure needs to be created, reliable infrastructure to be able to provide that kind of information and internet coverage across the country. So infrastructure is required. Then the pricing has to be very, very cheap so that there is a true democratization of internet and usage of internet. It should not be that you consume 1 GB of your internet data and it will cost you 1 month of your salary. Nobody will use internet. That used to be the case earlier. Nowadays, internet data has been very affordable. That is why it is used so significantly, isn't it? Then language and technical literacy. These are also the barriers. Now, what it does, in many of the cases, it basically means a difference between reaching your potential and not even being aware of what you can do. In many of the cases, if you are a trader, if you are a local producer, in the case of medium or a small industry, you can be able to sell your product if you are aware of the digital medium, and you will find in your own locality as well. You'll find that those shopkeepers, those traders, those producers who have access to internet, they are able to augment their business almost exponentially. Their products are able to reach out to the world. But simultaneously, the digitally illiterate who do not have literacy about digital network, who do not have affordability, who do not have accessibility, you'll find that they stagnate. Now, the same is the case with the future generation as well. In the future generation, many of them now, because most of the educational materials, etc., across the world, they are available on digital network, that provides easy accessibility to those who can afford the digital network, who have the infrastructure to avail that. There, when you go to rural areas of the country till today, where the speed of the internet is very, very slow, how can a student basically, or how can we expect that individual student who is really willing enough to do and avail the same potential? So there are a lot of damaging implications. Now, when we talk about the government of India, the government of India, through its Digital India program, has launched various different initiatives in order to bring digital literacy, in order to bring the digitization and make digitization as a part of our day-to-day life. So here you will find a list of various different government programs, the government schemes, which have been put to use. For example, eKranti, to revolutionize electronic service delivery, common service centers that you have in many areas. So they provide more than 400 digital services to rural citizens by various village level entrepreneurs. And you have these common service centers established in the various different rural areas. That significantly augments or enhances digital literacy. Then you have the mobile application for new age governance, that is Umang, right? So this is a part of e-governance, which brings, through the digital medium, which brings the government and the citizenry much closer to each other, right? Your grievances are addressed much sooner. Then e-district mission mode project benefits the citizens by delivering various different services like birth certificate, death certificate, caste certificate, income certificate, all of that on digital medium. Then you have DigiLocker. Most of you would be using that. Availability of various public documents in the online fora. Similarly, UPI. Then CoWIN in the case of vaccination during COVID period. MyGov app, where the citizens can participate in governance. Then you have Meri Pehchan, direct benefit transfer, Diksha, which is for education. So all these initiatives by the government that you find listed, all of this is in order to ease the life of the citizens. But will that solve any purpose if the citizens, they don't have access to internet? So that is where digital divide needs to be targeted. That is where we need to take care that everybody gets equitable access to digital resources. So local government should be given special emphasis with regards to digital services as they are closest to the citizens. Their interaction with the citizens is the maximum. That is the way forward. Government should ensure better internet connectivity with digital infrastructure, particularly in the rural areas. And also e-government to local language, so that digital literacy doesn't become a hindrance. So that if you are not aware of, let's say, English language, if you are not proficient in English, does not mean you do not have the right to access the digital content that you have. Even the vernacular languages, information should be provided in them, in the mother tongue, in the local mother tongue. That is what will make digital information appealing to everyone and anyone. And eventually that is required if you want the society to gain a kind of a parity. After all, Article 14 of our Constitution, what does it talk about? Equality of opportunity. That equality of opportunity, equal status to the citizens. How can we even dream of that if we don't talk about digital parity? And if we let that divide grow, eventually it will turn into a menace which will have a wider ramification in the society, divide the society into the haves and the have-nots. That will never be conducive enough. Okay, so that is where we will end the session. So basically, it is also essential to improve the existing models effectively to prevent hazards, right? And also, government and private sector should participate in the research and development, as you are seeing in the case of the launch of the 5G network, where various different companies came together. Infrastructure, when you develop at your own level, that is how it will happen. Okay, so that is where we'll restrict the session. And I hope the session has been helpful to you and you have basically gained something. So digital parity is basically, Snehal, when everybody has got equal opportunity in terms of what is the access to digital networks, etc. Okay. Yashpal, that is something you will be able to improve only by practice, my dear friend. Now, few of the other questions. If fusion in sun does not need such high temperature, fusion in sun also requires very high temperature, right? Prajwal. Then, doesn't it increase the helium concentration in the atmosphere? Namrata, nuclear fusion is never carried out at such a large scale that it will keep on releasing helium. Okay, and anyways, helium is such a light gas, it will escape to the top of the atmosphere, but nonetheless, till now, we don't have that much production of helium. Helium can always then be recycled, can be reused for various other purposes. Is pharmaceutical pollution happening only through human excretion? No, from the factories, pharmaceutical factories, Jairam. Mantasha, Great Barrier Reefs are warm water corals, hard corals in certain cases. Few of them are soft corals as well. And no, Sakshi, cryomesh won't lead to pollution in the marine bodies because it is a productive, it is a kind of an eco-friendly aspect that we have. Right, and Athira, coral bleaching occurs with the change in optimal, then won't it be bleached at cryo? No. Cryo level temperature, it is not put underwater. It is put somewhere else and then later reintroduced. Afrin, warm water is good for, warm water is what leads to coral bleaching. When the sea surface temperature rises, that is what leads to coral bleaching. Ideally, warm water corals, they are suitable and suited at around 24, 26 degrees Celsius. Okay. Ozone recovery, Yashika, the ozone recovery and reduction of HFC emission, that will have a conducive and a positive effect in terms of mitigation against climate change. It will reduce the rise of temperature thereby. Okay. Right. So I have tried to answer most of them. What is the use of coral bleaching? Coral bleaching is not a positive thing that it will have a use. It has detrimental impacts in the sense that it damages the marine environment, marine ecosystem, reduces the oxygen content, reduces the biodiversity as well. Akhilesh, in case your grievances have not been addressed, don't worry, my dear friend. Kindly write a mail to us, okay, and we'll get back to you in detail. I'm not able to see your question, Akhilesh. That is why I'm unable to address it. Okay. API is active pharmaceutical ingredient, which is an ingredient for the manufacturing of various different types of drugs in general. Svalbard Vikash is basically the seed vault that you have off the coast of Norway. Okay. Eutrophication, Satyam, is the overloading of the water body with the nutrients, which in a way leads to harmful algal blooms. Akhilesh, write a mail to me, reach out to me, and we'll take it further. Okay, reach out to me and we'll take it. In India, we also need to store all types of. Yes, that also happens. So, okay, that is where we'll restrict the session today, guys. Thank you for being patient enough. Till we meet again, take care of yourself. Keep on preparing and working hard. All the good success to you going ahead in the future. Thank you. Goodbye and good night.